Regenerating new talents and opportunities are better than just to rely on those who sure is great but will not be sustainable at all. When major dominating clubs takes for granted these advantages that they have, such as gathering all of these great players solely because they're financially capable, we think it becomes problematic because they don't realize how much of an unfair environment of sport that they're creating, but also how they're actually limiting their own development in terms of financial, trainings, and even sustainability. What's the burden for government then? We would show you how and what the implementation looks like, what is the ideal football club's interest and main goal, as well as the ideal sports value that we really want to uphold, as well as how this implementation is going to be in line and support all of the goals that we want. A few models then. Firstly, we would set the limit and we would consider all of the revenue of the league, right? This requires a very deep analysis to make sure that the maximum amount that we put out is still enough for us to have enough accommodations for our own development, such as our own facilities, trainings, and whatnot, right? We do not want to be like contingent on splurging on this one or two players, but we will have no money left, or we have no safety net, which I will explain later on the urgency of. But then secondly, we think we're going to conduct an agreement for everyone, right? We want to make sure that we can really maximize the maximum amount that we were given, right? Which means that we have to be highly selective of choosing a certain player. This can mean that we will go through several referendums or even meetings with the higher-ups or boards, for example, because we really want to prioritize the quality over the quantity with the maximum amount that we were given. But then thirdly and lastly, we would do a gradual reviews because we're aware of the fact that the financial stability can be very dynamic by the fact of the inflation or even the player's salary rate itself, right? So we really want to adjust with it, even if it means we have to let go a certain player because it already exceeds the cap budget, which I will prove to you later on why it's going to be better. Moving on to my arguments then, let me start with a few characterizations. The football club's interest, yes, we have established that they want to be the best team and that they really want to win, right? Obviously, by having some really great players, and we're not trying to say that it's necessarily bad. However, we also need to maintain the value of the ideal sport that we want. We want to maintain a competitive environment where players are engaged and motivated to be better and better. Furthermore, we want these clubs to keep on developing, and it's going to be really great for two things: the long-term sustainability and their growth, which is going to be their main goal. But then how will the salary cap support all that? Firstly, we think that this would really prevent these major wealthy clubs to dominate solely on their financial resources. Panels, we're not saying that winning a competition because you're the best team is wrong. But in this context, we think these clubs are very much aware of what they're doing, which is they do have the tendency and interest to make sure that no one has the opportunity to win but them, right? Because they really want to be the first champion all the time, but not giving others the same chances and opportunities. But then why is this wrong? A, this could really lose the value of the sport that we want. Under opposition, the disparity and gap between clubs are so big that things start to become very predictable, right? Many minor teams will get discouraged because they have no realistic chance of winning at all. When things become so predictable, things are less exciting, right? This unbalanced competitiveness is so discouraged because not only do these minor groups have no chance at all, but these major groups would have less motivation to strive for perfection because they're like constantly on top all the time as no one at their level, right? This strive for perfection is so important to make sure that, you know, the sport's success itself are objectively based on skills and merits, and it's not on luck or like who's like on a rich club, for example. You know, so we want to maintain the credibility of the sport, which is why this strive for perfection and skills is very, very important, right? But then the fans would also be infected. We should know that fans has so much contributions to a league's incomes and benefits, right? When the sport gets less exciting, the fans would eventually drop, which I'll explain more significantly later on. But then B, if we compare this with how the world would look like under government with a limitation and everyone having an opportunity to win, these clubs would eventually try to make the most effective decision, including choosing a certain player or choosing the most strategic training techniques, for example. They have the burden to focus on these young, raw talent, right? They don't want to be reliable or contingent on these great players that they just quote unquote buy or rent all the time, but rather to focus on developing new talents, making like youth programs or making a more selective selections and scouting. This furthermore can also be really great for the long-term sustainability because there's a really great regeneration there. Regeneration would be really good, which makes the sport going to be as competitive and as on fire for years to come. Also, when sports becomes a lot more balanced like this, of course, most of the fans will become more engaged. It's very likely to attract more massive engagement for the public. This gets to be be really great to opens up a lot more opportunities, such as new markets and of course the revenue, right, from all of the sponsors, tickets, from people going to the matches, because it's still on heat, right? And this sense of heat and competitiveness is something that did not exist under opposition. So overall, the growth of the sport itself and the value of sport will eventually be fulfilled under government. But then secondly, I'm going to talk about more on the financial sustainability itself. Three things. A, of course, the most obvious one here is to prevent overspending itself. I think it's also pretty self-explanatory how there's so much necessities that needs to be covered. Great players can and should be achieved through other ways than being contingent on buying these great developed player, which is to actually focus on the youth talent development, like I've mentioned. But we should realize that this took extremely expensive, costs such as coaching, infrastructure, even a safety net for injuries that might occur any moment, right? Not to mention the market and the economy situations that are also very unstable. Under opposition, their main goal is to get that one or two player that is very likely for them to overspend, leading them to have a minimum allocation for the development. In government, we're going to have more control over these wages. It's going to help us to allocate it more efficiently. This overspending is also very likely because notice that a player's rate or salary can escalate really fast because of the competition with other clubs, right? Because like other clubs really want them so badly because maybe the performance is really good. Without this limitation, it's likely that clubs will just try to satisfy the player as much, by just, spending more and more money, which means that their money would be drained. So not only is it hard to get them there, but it's even harder to maintain them there. Under government, if it eventually exceeds the gap, we would just let these players go because it's eventually going to be better anyway, right, for the long-term sustainability. But then B, it's going to create a more responsible management of the money itself. A huge league or clubs like this needs to have this very clear system in terms of like the future planning and what they want to do in the next 10 or 20 years, right? Because of course they will try to make this as competitive for as long as possible. So basically what's going to happen is this going to encourage these clubs to prioritize and allocate their resources wisely, which leads to more savings and more opportunities in the future. It's going to have a more fixed cap. Under status quo, let's say we agree on a player for $100,000, right? But it can go up to like 150 or even 200K, which means that we will need to take away other allocations from other areas such as trainings or even other players' salary because we want to maintain one person only. So this is not going to be fair. But then see, under government, it's going to be a lot more fair play because like so far people could easily say that they won because they're rich and they can afford great players as if it was based on luck whether your team is rich or not. However, under government, we would solely focus on skills as how sports supposed to be is to begin with, right? So overall, even if opposition tries to argue about how clubs should have the right to use their privileges and that they really want to be the best and they should have the right to, it's not going to be exclusive, and it's already debunked because it is rather harmful as a whole and it ruins the sport itself and even their own team, right? The only win-win situation of supporting both major and minor league goals, which is sustainability and growth, while maintaining the true value of sport both principally and practically, are both exclusive or fulfilled under government. So proud to propose.